Hi, my name is Jody Kreiner, and I am currently an optical engineer at Northrop Grumman, working primarily with lasers and directed energy systems. When I'm not at work, I am also a graduate student at the University of Arizona studying optical engineering. I received my bachelor's degree in chemical engineering with minors in optical engineering, mathematics, and astronomy and astrophysics. Today, I'm going to tell you a little about lasers. So, what is a laser? Well, laser stands for light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. And if you aren't a scientist, that probably just sounds like a bunch of technical word vomit. So let's break it into something a little easier to digest. The first part, light amplification. This is exactly what it sounds like, increasing the amount of light or photons of a given source or signal. If you want to get a little bit more specific, optical amplification increases the light signal directly without first converting it to an electrical signal. The second half of that acronym must be analyzed together. First, the simple part, radiation. Here, radiation refers to electromagnetic radiation, which is basically just a fancy way of saying waves. Electromagnetic waves cover everything from radio, microwaves, infrared, our visible light spectrum, ultraviolet, and all the way out to X and gamma rays. For simplicity, we will assume that the radiation we are referring to is visible light, or wavelengths ranging from 380 to 700 nanometers. Realistically, lasers can be designed in a vast range of wavelengths, well beyond that of what our eye can detect. However, that's outside the scope of this discussion. So for now, radiation equals light. Now, the remaining two sciencey words, stimulated emission. Stimulated emission is a process of forcing an atom to emit radiation, or light, by causing an excited electron to drop to a lower energy level. If a material is bombarded with energy, either in the form of light or heat, the atoms of that element will become excited. This means that some of its electrons would move from their natural ground level orbit to a higher excited level orbit. But eventually, these electrons will want to move back down to their original ground state. Thanks to some super smart scientists in the 1700s, we know that energy cannot be created or destroyed. Thus, when an atom absorbs energy and shifts electrons into an excited state, it must similarly release that energy in order to return to its ground state. This energy release is known as emission and often occurs in the form of light. If this process occurs naturally, it is known as spontaneous emission. However, some other super smart scientists figured out a way to control that process, in which case it's called stimulated emission. If you're still confused, let's try to make this process a little easier to understand. Think of lasing like water in a bucket. If you fill the bucket with water, that would be equivalent to pumping energy into the atoms of a specific material. Once the bucket is full, you turn off the tap and your bucket, or atoms, are now excited. You then open a tiny hole in the bottom, allowing the water to start trickling out. This would be equivalent to those excited electrons spontaneously dropping back down to the ground state. Even though it's just a trickle, eventually the entire bucket will be empty, and all our atoms will have returned to their ground state. But we want more light, or water, now. So you take a huge brick and drop it in the bucket, causing most of the water to overflow out of the top. Lasers are essentially our proverbial brick. They amplify the amount of light produced by a system, or increase the amount of water output by stimulating the emission of radiation, or dropping a brick to overflow the bucket. So you may be asking yourself, what makes a laser different from other sources of light, like your standard light bulb? Or maybe you weren't, but I'm going to explain it either way. We already know that by design, we are amplifying natural light emissions from certain element or molecule. What makes a laser unique is that it amplifies this light all in the same direction, hence why you get a beam and not a flood of light like a light bulb. Now, we touched on this briefly earlier, and if you've taken a high school math or physics class, you're probably aware that light travels in waves. The distance between the peaks of these waves is cleverly known as wavelength. Wavelength dictates the type of electromagnetic radiation present, or in our case, the color of light we see. When light waves have the same spatial frequency and waveform, they are said to be coherent. This is what differentiates lasers from other light sources. The light they produce is spatially and or temporally coherent. Spatial coherence is expressed as a narrow output beam with a small focus and typically a very low divergence. Divergence is how much the beam spreads out after leaving the source. Since a laser beam typically stays the same size over great distances, it has a very low divergence. Conversely, A flashlight would have a very high divergence. Temporal coherence refers to the frequency phase correlation of the output. Basically, each photon will have its own wave pattern. Even if they are all the same wavelength, that doesn't necessarily mean the wave of two individual photons will match. Lasers implement various methods to overlap the wave patterns so the entire output beam has a single waveform. Think of it like a marching band. If everyone was running around the field in different directions at different speeds, this would be analogous to incoherent light, like that which is produced by many light bulbs and flashlights. Now, if everyone starts traveling in the same direction, but still at different speeds and distances from each other, we would say they are spatially coherent. Finally, the band gets their act together, starts marching cohesively at the same pace in the same direction. They are now temporally coherent. Great, so now that we have a lot of the definitions out of the way, how do lasers stimulate this coherent radiation emission? Well, a laser consists of a gain medium, a mechanism to energize it, and something to provide optical feedback. The gain medium is a material which will amplify the light through stimulated emission. Basically, it's what we're providing the energy to. This gain medium will be designed to amplify a specific wavelength or wavelengths of light. In order for it to amplify light, the medium needs to be supplied with energy in a process called pumping. Energy is typically supplied as an electrical current, or in some cases, as light of a different wavelength. As the gain medium is being supplied with energy, it will begin to amplify the stimulated emission predominantly at the peak wavelength of the gain frequency curve. The feedback optic then keeps this energy passing through the gain medium, increasing the stimulation. As the stimulated emission grows, eventually one frequency will dominate all others, forming a coherent beam. Another way to conceptualize this is comparing it to a public address audio system. Inevitably, you've watched a speech or presentation or show where the presenter steps too close to the speaker with the microphone and a high-pitched screech rings through the room. That screech is at the peak of the gain frequency curve for the speaker, which is essentially just an audio oscillator. When the microphone is in the proper proximity, you get positive feedback through the system, which then subsequently provides that oh-so-pleasant sound. Similarly, a laser will form a coherent beam when the optic has provided enough feedback to dominate stimulated emission of a single wavelength. So, in order to make a laser, we know that we need a gain medium, an energization method, and a feedback optic. Thanks to decades of research, these components can come in numerous different forms. This includes gas, chemical and excimer lasers, solid-state lasers, fiber lasers, photonic crystal lasers, semiconductor lasers, dye lasers, free electron lasers, and more. Many of these designs simply refer to the type of gain medium and or feedback relay. For the sake of simplicity, we will only go into details on the most common designs. Gas lasers were the first continuous light laser with the invention of the helium neon discharger, commonly known as a HENI laser. In this design, the gain medium is a concentrated gas designed to cycle molecules from a low to high energy state as opposed to single electrons inside an atom. The most common gases used for this purpose are carbon dioxide, metal ions like helium silver and neon copper, helium neon, and nitrogen. Chemical and excimer lasers are both subsets of gas lasers. However, they are powered by a chemical reaction and are therefore beyond the scope of this general overview. The next most common type of laser is the solid-state laser, which uses doped glass or crystalline rods as the gain medium. The doping refers to adding ions into the solid lattice that can provide the required energy states for stimulated emission. This can occur by having the dopant fill an empty space in the lattice, move between the atoms or molecules of a lattice, or exchange places with one of the atoms of a lattice molecule. Common dopants include neodymium, ytterbium, thulium, and erbium. Ytterbium is typically used in crystals operating in the infrared. Titanium doped sapphire is another popular laser. Seeing as its highly tunable infrared output makes it a great option for spectroscopy, which is a method of measuring the interaction of matter with light. This design is also what is used in your common laser pointers that you can buy at your local Walmart. One downside to solid-state lasers is that they can heat rapidly from the input pump power and cause various thermal lensing effects, decreasing the overall system efficiency. The last common type of laser we will discuss in this video is a fiber laser. Fiber lasers are a subset of solid-state lasers in which the light is guided through a long optical fiber via total internal reflection, or TIR. TIR occurs when waves arrive at the interface from one medium to another, i.e. the optical fiber core and the coating around it, and are not refracted into the second medium but are instead completely reflected back into the first. This guidance of the light allows for extremely long gain regions, which provide advantageous cooling conditions and reduce the thermal distortion of the beam. The main downside of this design is that they have a fundamental limit in the intensity of light the fiber can support without introducing insurmountable optical distortions or destroying the fiber material altogether. So, the next time you're sitting at home watching YouTube videos of cats chasing laser pointers across the floor, think about the centuries of science that went into making that little beam of light possible. And then keep right along with your day, because really, who needs to scientifically dissect cute cat videos? Thanks for watching.